Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. My girlfriend of 1 year broke up with me after my head injury. 7 months later, I found out why. Earlier this year, my ex-girlfriend, Alexandra, broke up with me for reasons that she still hasn't told me herself. The weeks before the breakup are a blur to me. I'd sustained a head injury with no memory of how, and I suspect that's the reason I can't recall anything I'd supposedly done/said to her. Alex and I had both known each other since secondary school, but only became a couple during our first year of university. We're now on our second year, and our accommodations are about 20 minutes apart. 3 days ago, Alex's diary came to me in the mail. Presumably she's the one who sent it to me, but I have no way of knowing. Upon reading the entries from the dates I have no memory of, I had an unshakable feeling of terror, one that hasn't left me since. Some additional context needed for this story. Bunny Bunny was an infamous Facebook group back in 2022 in which members would post oversaturated pictures of school kids, predominantly male, along with rating out of 5 carats. This was often accompanied by an unsettling caption like unique taste or beautiful mouth. The group began to circulate around most schools in my area, and it was all anyone would talk about. The leading theory among students was that local predators were using the group to rape potential victims, but there was never any evidence to support this. The group was promptly banned from Facebook after the parents of each child featured had discovered the posts. After the incident, and a few dozen complaints to my school, we were forbidden from talking about it again out of respect for the students involved. Below are extracts from the diary that I've shortened to include only the parts about me during the days leading up to our breakup. Tuesday, January 7th. Daniel was ignoring me all day. He usually sent me a cute message every morning to start the day on a good note. But today, he didn't message me until about 5 p.m. When he finally responded, he asked if I want to come over, and I enthusiastically said yes. But when I arrived, his behavior was unusual. He gave me an odd smile and appeared to be acting shy around me, glaring at me like he was starstruck. I thought it was cute and assumed he just thought I looked really pretty that day. There was also a noticeable bruise on the left side of his forehead, which was worrying me, but he was dismissive whenever I mentioned it. It's nothing, stop worrying. I decided to drop it because he was visibly annoyed by my comments and I was afraid I'd embarrass him. Friday, January 10th. Daniel's behavior is becoming concerning. He isn't attending his lectures like he normally does, and he keeps forgetting basic things like where he's left his keys, dates we had planned, passwords for his emails, etc. And there's this awful smell coming from his bed. He's also picked up weird habits, ones that he's never showed signs of having before. Habits such as licking his lips whenever he sees me, smelling my hair, squeezing me tighter than he usually would whenever we embrace, and barely blinking. I think the worst of it, though, is the obvious decline in his hygiene. He isn't showering or brushing his teeth unless I bring it up, and I have to practically force him to. We share the same skincare products, and it's blatantly obvious that he's neglecting them. Monday, January 13th. Last night, I went to Daniel's accommodation after my lecture, and he was even more disheveled than he has been for the past few days. His eyes were bloodshot, and his breathing was very apparent. It almost sounded as though he was running out of air. I asked him if he was feeling okay, and he practically lunged at me and started aggressively making out with me. This caught me by surprise, so I pushed him away as hard as I could, but still, he kept trying to climb on top of me. I yelled, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" And that had seemed to snap him out of it. But periodically throughout the rest of the day, he kept trying to convince me to sleep with him. As the night grew darker, Daniel became more frustrated. Whenever I dared to shut down his creepy sexual advances, he'd just stare at me like a wild animal. Honestly, It was beginning to creep me out. He had this expressionless look on his face. He wasn't blinking, and his eyes were even starting to well up with tears. I went to go brush my teeth to get away from the situation. But when I came back a few minutes later, he was completely knocked out like he'd already been asleep for hours. I realized his eyes were probably so bloodshot due to exhaustion, and fortunately for me, the sleep had finally caught up to him. Relieved, I grabbed my phone and immediately called an Uber so I didn't have to walk back to my accommodation alone. But right after making the payment, I saw something moving in the lower corner of my eye. I quickly shifted my gaze downwards and saw a person's hand, slowly creeping its way out from underneath Daniel's bed. There's no words to describe the fear I felt in this moment. I was stood paralyzed, whilst this middle-aged man started emerging from below my boyfriend's unconscious body. The man was slightly overweight, balding, and he looked like a week-old corpse. After he stood upright, we locked eyes for a moment, and his mouth twisted into the most horrific smile I've ever seen before uttering the words, "Thank you." At that moment, I snapped out of whatever petrified trance I was in, screamed as loud as I could, and ran straight out of the building without wasting any time to grab any of my possessions. Thursday, January 16th. I've been staying at my parents' house for the past 3 days, just trying to wrap my head around the whole Daniel situation. He's gone back to sending me good morning texts like nothing's happened, and he claims to have no idea who the man under his bed was. What I want to know is why he said, "Thank you." Was he recording us? Was Daniel aware of this and getting paid to fulfill that man's perverted fantasy of spying on a 19-year-old girl? Maybe that's why he was so determined to have sex with me all day, and why he got mad when I kept refusing. I think I'm just going to cut him out of my life, because this whole situation has tainted the way that I see him. Friday, January 17th. This morning I received an email from a former classmate at my old school with a link attached. The link was for a Facebook group called Rabbit. I clicked the link out of curiosity and wasn't at all prepared for what I was about to see. The group was bunny in everything but name. Hundreds of posts of children and teens being rated with carrots. These creeps have been active and posting this whole time, at least 2 posts a day for the last year. My anger was short-lived though, and quickly turned into horror when I scrolled down and was greeted by a familiar face on a post from Tuesday 14th. The profile picture of the user who posted, it was the same twisted smile I saw back in Daniel's room. It was a man under his bed. His username was Elmer Fudd, and to my utter shock, he posted an oversaturated selfie of Daniel with 5 carrot emojis across his forehead. The caption read, "Comfortable skin. End of diary extracts." I checked the selfie used in the Rabbit post, which is surprisingly still up, and I don't remember taking it. I thought Alex was lying when she asked me about a so-called man who crawled out from under the bed. I hope somebody here can make sense of all of this, but I think it's best I try not to contact her anymore. Story 2. It doesn't know how to take care of me. It doesn't know how to take care of me. My name is Joshua. I'm 43 years old. I used to live in rural Oregon, but approximately 3 months ago, I went missing. I need the world to know what happened to me. I'm not sure how coherent or polished this will be. Since I don't have much time, I'll just edit as I go. To all of my loved ones who may be reading this, I suggest you stop here. I don't want you to worry about me. But mostly, I don't want these to be your final memories of me. That day 3 months ago was perfectly dull and ordinary. I got home from work at about 6 p.m. after a long commute to my house in the middle of nowhere. I took my shoes off, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and settled in on the couch to watch TV. Then came a rumbling. It was the second loudest noise I've ever heard in my entire life. My first thought was, earthquake. I could say it was like thunder, but while thunder is loud, resonant, and sublime, as in the terrifying, overwhelming, godly sublime, it's something you listen to at a comfortable distance. You can cozy up in your bed on a stormy night. knowing the storm raging outside can't hurt you. But it was nothing like that. Nothing can describe the sound of the roof being ripped off your home. This was not the doing of a spirit, nor a faith, nor an incorporeal, omnipresent being. It was a raw, physical thing, with stench and weight and wrinkles and such terrible enormity. But it might as well be a god, and it was here for me. The thing was larger than my house, perhaps twice over. Its body was a mass of knobbly joints. On the end of each appendage was a block of something like keratin or stone. I couldn't count how many of these appendages it had. It was made of them, all arranged like a Venus flytrap. Picture a hair clip, one of those claw-shaped ones, made of horse legs. That's the best way I can try to describe it. Then it pounced. It wrapped those many appendages around me, each as girthy as a redwood and with crushing power to match. My bare skin tingled wherever it touched. It had to have been corrosive, at least mildly, because those spots would develop into painful red rashes. The air in its grasp was suffocatingly acrid. The thing stunk horribly. The smell wasn't putrid or rotten, but caustic. Bleach, ammonia, acetone. It smelled like poison, like something that would give me cancer. It stung my eyes and airways. I was ripped from my home, lifted high up into the air, wind whipping all around me. The G-forces brutalized my body. Pressure expanded violently in my skull. I passed out. I opened my eyes to complete darkness, closed them, opened them again. It made no difference either way. My entire body hurt, but especially my head, which felt like it would explode at any second. Besides the throbbing in my ears, there was no sound. I ran my hand along the floor. It felt rough, porous, like pumice stone. I sat up slowly. The world was spinning. I realized I was hyperventilating. That's probably why I felt so dizzy, I thought. So I tried a technique called square breathing. Inhale, hold for 5 seconds, exhale, repeat. Instinct told me to breathe faster. I wasn't breathing enough. What the fuck just happened to me? I thought about that thing, how it smelled, how utterly helpless I was in its grasp. I thought it must have been a horrible dream. Then, out of any reaction my brain could produce in that moment, it pulled up ridicule. I think I've heard that line 1,000 times in every movie, show, or book I've ever seen. I must be dreaming, the protagonist says, and the audience either rolls their eyes or it doesn't register the sentiment at all because of how cliche it is. But, in truth, that is what occurred to me at that moment. What happened to me could not have been real, because it was too insane. My brain didn't evolve to process things like that. I laid there for a while, waiting for something to happen. When nothing did, I stood up and wandered around, groping around blindly in the dark. I felt a wall. I ran my fingers along its surface. It's made of a substance unlike anything I've ever touched. My hands glide smoothly across its slippery surface, like it's coated in oil, but it leaves no residue on my hands. Even the glossy, smooth materials I'm familiar with have traction when you run your palms across them. Glass, plastic, porcelain. But not this stuff. When I knock on it, it rings hollow like wood, but it has no texture whatsoever. I kept walking along the perimeter, feeling for a door, a window, anything. Nothing interrupted the unnatural perfection of these smooth walls. I didn't come upon any corners, either, but I did get a subtle sense of curvature. My room is cylindrical. I couldn't tell how big it was, though, nor did I know when I began making loops. So I took a tentative step away from the anchoring comfort of a solid surface, drifting toward the circle's center. A jolt of pain shot at my foot. I swore and lifted my leg. Gingerly, I ran my thumb along my sole and touched the embedded object. It was a nail. I had no idea what to make of that. But I knew I had to stay still. I didn't know what was waiting for me out there. I curled up on the floor. I ruminated there for a long time, repeating the catastrophe in my mind over and over. I tormented myself with the typical questions, the ones anyone would be asking in this situation. My logic paced in feverish circles. Then I was blind. It bathed the room in burning, sterile white. This, too, was silent, unaccompanied by the natural sound of a light switch or anything. Without transition, it was summoned. I panicked, of course, thinking that thing had returned. It hadn't. Things were still as ever. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and instinctively I looked up. The walls reached high above me and faded into darkness. I didn't see the entity, but I heard it. The great monster made the air quiver like the deepest notes of a double bass cello or a whale song. I've heard before that the sheer sonic power of a whale song can kill you. I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly true for this thing. The way I feel it resonate through my chest, rattle my bones. I truly believe it could rupture my organs if it got any louder. It's gotten close a few times, I think. When it hummed, I felt such a sharp pain in my eardrums I thought they'd exploded, and a debilitating shock of anguish in my abdomen. I couldn't even stand up straight after that, so I groveled, trembling on the floor. Another stretch of dread and waiting. I got up again and looked around. I live in a circle, maybe 30 feet in diameter. The walls and floor look how they feel. I began with only a few objects, standing starkly in blank space. A polyester blanket, a fake Christmas tree, a pile of 2x4s, a pile of nails, a hammer. A pipe sticks out of the floor. It's made out of the same material as the walls. I approached the pipe and cupped my hands underneath it. Freezing cold water flowed into my palms. The overflow dribbled onto the porous floor and drained away. With everything that had happened, I hadn't realized how thirsty I was. I took a sip. It tasted like salt and dirty metal. For the first few days, it only gave me salt water. That was when dehydration almost killed me, when the mucus in my throat felt like glue, when my piss came out as a brown syrup, when I could hardly form a coherent thought, let alone move. But right before I could die of dehydration, it switched to fresh water. I felt better after the water switch, but I was still starving. Frantic fluttering cut the silence, a hen clumsily flapping her wings. It descended from the abyss that looms above me and landed on the floor. Again, I didn't know what to make of that. Nothing happened for a long time, maybe a few days. My belly writhed and twisted, churning foamy bile, digesting itself. Was that what the chicken was for? Nothing else came down, so this was all I was going to get. I hit it with a hammer until it died. I was so nauseous, but so hungry, so overwhelmed by the simultaneous instincts to eject and consume. I ate the chicken raw and warm, and it made me shit blood. After the first chicken made me sick, they sent another. This time, they also provided a gas station lighter. I didn't kill this one. There was no way to cook it, anyway. No sharp tools to make kindling from the 2x4s. When I tried to light it, it stubbornly charred a black spot in the wood, but didn't ignite. There was no way I would try my chances again with raw bloody meat. So I kept her alive and named her Pat. She wasn't bad company. Her feathers were soft, and her adorable cooing sounds breathed life into the oppressive stillness. If my food remains uneaten for too long, they remove it. It wasn't long before they took her from me. I wasn't shocked or dismayed when it happened, but her absence left an aching silence in my cell for the coming weeks. Eventually it started to feed me other things. Raw potatoes, raw corn, hay cereal. This room has no ventilation, not even circulation of the same stale breaths festering stagnant in my cell. The air here is also thin. I don't think the atmosphere has enough oxygen. It reminds me of how it felt to breathe after I had COVID. I can heave as much as I want, and I'll still feel exhausted. The dizziness, the delirium, it never ends. I don't even know if my story is making sense so far. My head is swimming. I sometimes think I don't even know what's real anymore. There's no humidity here. I wake up every morning with chapped lips and a dry mouth. My eyes are sticky. My lungs shrivel with every gulp of air. The sandpaper ground has scraped off my soles. There's another detail that bears mentioning. It does wound my dignity to talk about this, and I'm sure it's not pleasant to hear. But if I omitted this, I would be glossing over a significant aspect of the sensory hell I find myself in. My room has no toilet, not even a bucket. The room started to fill with feces, both mine and the chickens. I at least have the sense to confine my waste to one area of the room, where I have to squat and do my business like a dog. The thin air, the warmth, the stench, it all compounds into exponential torture. I have to fight for every shit-stinking breath. The lights never turn off. either. I have no sense of time, no circadian rhythm, not a second where I'm not exposed. White room torture. Would you believe me if I said the worst part is the boredom? Not just boredom, but isolation. The human brain needs interaction as much as it needs food and water. I'm really trying to flex my literary muscles here, because I need someone to know what it's like to experience even a fraction of my misery. But I cannot describe to you the evil, gnawing thing that boredom is. My brain is atrophied because it was eaten up by the boredom. You can read this story in a few minutes. There's nothing that I can write in a single paragraph or any number of paragraphs to make you feel the way I feel every hour of every day, sitting in this little room. One day, something new happened. It brought with it a surge of mortal terror so powerful I thought I'd keel over and die right there. But at least it wasn't boring. The thing grabbed me while I was asleep. All over again, those enormous bony trunks closing around me, stopping right before crushing my bones. It somehow knows when to stop squeezing. I gulped up its astringent reek. It pulled me into darkness, and again my stomach dropped, but it was gentler than the first time. It unfurled its many limbs, allowing me to stand. The pale light of my cell revealed its features. It has grayish skin like an elephant. Wrinkles spread across the surface like cracks in asphalt. It's coated in a thin layer of tacky grease, like Vaseline. Beyond it is a void. Miles below is certain death. I peeled my foot off the surface and took a wobbling step. The ground shifted beneath me and I tumbled forward. I caught myself, palms slapping its rough, sticky hide. I still remember the bodily panic of falling, like I was about to vomit my heart out. It prodded me, so I crawled forward. Imagine trying to climb up a tree while it's moving, shifting around to accommodate your steps. Imagine scaling a living mountain. I stared into the abyss. I had to know where I was, what world I'd been dragged into. My cell glowed in the distance, a perfect round the size of my thumbnail. It reminded me of the moon. I looked back at the monster. My eyes ran along hundreds of feet of skin, dozens of limbs. I followed the length of its body until it disappeared like miles of highway. My eyes adjusted to the dim and began to form shapes out of darkness. There were more of these things out there, all branching from colossal pillars, all converging on a great planetary mass. The realization crawled up my spine and needled my brain. I was standing on a hand. This eldritch alien titan unceremoniously put me back in my room. Life resumed as if nothing ever happened. It gives me more random items sometimes. A treadmill that I can't use because it doesn't have power. A couple books written in languages I can't read. Dirty clothes that don't fit me. Children's clothes, XXL jeans, a cocktail dress, shoes with no matching pair. One day, for some inexplicable reason, it lowered a car into my cell, a silver Honda Civic. I couldn't drive it, since there were no keys. One of the windows was broken, however, so I was able to crawl inside and manually unlock the doors. I've been using it as a shelter. I draped some fabric over the windows. I was finally allowed respite from the relentless glow. I sheltered in the cozy blanket of darkness for the first time in months. The car was a godsend. It was the best gift they'd ever given me. I tried to kill myself with the hammer. All that did was give me a pounding headache and probably a concussion. It was stupid, I know, but there were no other tools at my disposal. I might have actually succeeded if I put more force into it. But the human self-preservation instinct is stronger than my will. Maybe some part of me was holding out hope that I would be rescued, but I know that's impossible. I'll only be able to leave if my captor chooses to release me. Maybe it'll grow bored of me one day. If that day comes, I pray they show me mercy. I may not even live that long. My health declines more and more the longer I stay here. I'm not getting proper nourishment, sunlight, or oxygen. I don't have my meds, either. It gave me a smartphone. Somehow, by some miracle, it has an internet connection. I have no clue how that's possible. Maybe it can manipulate electromagnetic fields, or something. Who the hell knows? But what it doesn't have is a charger. I already called emergency services. They can't track my location. They said they would send people to look for me, but I'm not entirely sure I'm on Earth anymore. I don't even know if I'm in the same dimension. This phone, is the only way to reach for the outside world. It is my anchor, my lifeline, my angel. It is slowly dying in my hands. To my loved ones, I told you not to read this far, but if you did, I can't blame you. I would do the same. I already said all of this in my calls to you, but I want to immortalize it here, too. Amelia and Eric, it was a joy to raise you two. Eric, you've grown into such a talented artist. I know I said this a million times, but please never stop chasing your dreams. If you believe in yourself, you can make it anywhere you want. That cartoon show you dreamed of making, with your skills, I know you can make it happen. Amelia, congratulations on getting into law school. From a moment you could talk, I could tell you were going to be a fiercely brilliant person, and I was right. Strong, confident, intelligent. I'm amazed at the woman you grew up to be. I know you can kill it in a courtroom. Study hard, and you'll be the best attorney in the state. I can't overstate how proud I am of both of you. Scott, Catherine, and Mikey, you're the best friends I could have ever hoped for. You had my back through thick and thin. So I just wanted to say one last time how much I love you guys. Story 3. Overtime. It was almost midnight when I finally looked up from my spreadsheet. The office was silent, except for the low hum of the ventilation system. Most of the lights had shut off hours ago, leaving only the pale pool of my desk lamp over the keyboard. I'd stayed late plenty of times before, but tonight, something felt different. The air felt heavier, as if the room was holding its breath. My ears rang faintly in the quiet. I saved my work, stretched, and decided to grab a drink from the break room before finishing the last report. The hallways were dark, the motion sensors kicking on only when I was halfway through each corridor. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Steady. Behind me. I told myself it had to be Janet from accounting. She sometimes worked late too, but when I turned around, the hallway was empty. No footsteps. No movement. Just shadows. I held my breath, straining to hear. The sound didn't come again until I started walking. I quickened my pace, my shoes clicking louder than I wanted them to. The footsteps followed. I reached the break room and flipped the light switch. Nothing. The bulb hummed faintly, but the room stayed dark. That's when the sound changed. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a faint scraping, slow, deliberate, like fingernails trailing along the wall just outside the doorway. My stomach tightened. I backed out, heart thudding, and headed to my desk. My monitor was still on, but my spreadsheet was gone. In its place was a new file, filling the screen with a single sentence, typed over and over in neat black letters. Don't turn around. I just stood there. The air behind me shifted, warm, damp, as though someone was leaning in close. And then I heard it. Breathing. Wet. Slow. Too close to be real. My fingers trembled over the keyboard. But before I could move, the desk lamp flickered once, twice, and went out. The darkness wasn't empty. I woke up in my bed the next morning, drenched in sweat. My alarm clock was blinking 12 o'clock. The power must have gone out in the night. My head throbbed, but the sunlight spilling to the blinds was almost enough to make me laugh. Just a nightmare. A bad one, but still a dream. I shuffled to the bathroom, still groggy. The cold tile woke me up as I turned on the faucet and splashed water on my face. My reflection looked pale, eyes sunken, like I hadn't slept in days. As I brushed my teeth, the lingering unease from the dream started creeping back in. Something about the way the air felt wrong. The quiet in my apartment wasn't peaceful. It was a kind of silence that felt occupied. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder more than once. Just a habit, I told myself. Dream residue. Still, my chest felt tight. By the time I went to the kitchen to pour coffee, the knot in my stomach was impossible to ignore. My hand was shaking when I reached for the mug, though I couldn't say why. That's when I saw it. On my desk, across the room, sat my work laptop. The lid was open, the screen glowing faintly. A single document was open. One sentence filled the page, repeated in neat black letters. Don't turn around. Story 4. Someone mailed me a sex doll that looks exactly like my dead wife. Call me delusional. Call me whatever you'd like. God knows I've heard it all, and from my own family and friends. The people I thought would always believe me have written me off as some kind of nutcase, fueled by grief to drag all of my loved ones into my own perverted delusions. And so I turn here to a place where I have no one whose opinions of me I care about. No offense. Eleanor's funeral was a small event. It was less than what I would have chosen for her, but it was already more than what her family and I could afford combined. And I knew that she wouldn't have wanted any of us going completely bankrupt for her, even in the event of her death. It sounds so ridiculous, and maybe even cold to those who didn't know her, but the times when I hear her voice the most in my head are when dealing with my finances. Put those chips down. The lights in the convenience store would flicker, and I would swear she was with me, and my hands would shake. Calls in the bag of Doritos to crinkle. Calls in the clerk to squint his eyes at me from behind the counter. Jesus Christ. Diego, the electricity bill is already late. Are you crazy? And then we would say it together, except my voice came out of my mouth, and hers was only imaginary. And the clerk would look at me all crazy, and she got away without embarrassment because she wasn't alive anymore, and I was... Every dollar counts. Yeah. Spare me the lecture, Ellie. Anyways, it was small, and after a gathering at the funeral home, closed casket of course, it took place in her grandmother's backyard. It was catered by our favorite restaurant, and we labeled it a celebration of life. And we all gathered around an unlit fire pit and told stories about her until her mother's crying was so loud, even from the upstairs bedroom, that her brother told us it was time for us all to go home. He was the only one who even really looked at me that entire night. As I was leaving, he stopped me, grabbing my arm. Diego, he sighed, rubbing at his face with a hand that wasn't still holding on to me, as if I was going to flee. Are you, doing okay? I didn't know what to say to that. Was I okay? Did he mean in the grand scheme of things? Or right this second, was he asking if I was okay? Or if I was going to kill myself? I didn't know the answer to any of it. I had always hated that question, and right then felt almost hilariously impossible to respond to. I blinked at him dumbly. Sure. He looked at me for a few seconds too long to be comfortable. I knew what he wanted to say. He wanted to say it's not your fault, Diego. He wanted to say, ignore our family. They're heartbroken, and they don't know what to think right now. I pulled my arm away, letting him off the hook. I'll see you around. I blanked. He nodded weakly. That was a sort of awkward interaction that previously probably would have haunted me for weeks. I would have paced in our bedroom that night, with Eleanor lying on the bed, trying to read through my anxious rambling and rolling her eyes at me. But right then, this time, it was gone from my head almost as soon as he was out of my field of vision. I didn't want to go home, so I drove around for a while. I avoided every spot that we used to go to. At every right turn we used to take, I would turn left. At every intersection, I fought the urge to close my eyes, so I wouldn't picture her waiting on the corner after work, waving to me to pick her up. I ran a couple of stop signs, wanting to get out of every familiar neighborhood as quickly as possible. It didn't take long for me to realize it was no use. She was everywhere. She would always be everywhere. I just had to bite the bullet. The package didn't faze me at first. It looked unassuming, sitting on our doorstep, large and silent. I almost just shoved it aside to lumber through the front door, so I could pass out on the couch and turn off my brain, but something stopped me. Her voice. Whose package is this? Is it yours, Diego? That was when I took pause, because it wasn't mine, or at least I didn't think it was. Like I said, Eleanor hadn't been strict necessarily, but she was always very financially conscious. A purchase that would have come in the size of a box would have at least been a conversation when she'd been alive. And after she hadn't been anymore, I hadn't exactly had the urge to shop online. I inspected it. It kind of felt like it was inspecting me back. I looked for a label, anything, any sign that it was meant for one of the neighbors, but there was nothing. It was just a large, unmarked cardboard box, sealed shut with straight and clean lines of clear packing tape. I sighed, burdened by the idea of lugging it inside, but curiosity and that voice in my head won out in the end. I dropped the box in the living room and shuffled to the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge and a pair of scissors. Popping the lid off the bottle with the blade, I slumped onto the couch, staring at it in animosity. In a way, I hated it for giving me something to care about, even in such a microscopic sense. I wanted to be asleep or dead or something in between, but now I was present and my eyes were still open because of this stupid cardboard box. I tore it open, scattering packing peanuts all across the carpet. Eleanor would have had a cow if she had been there. I smiled a little despite myself. My smile quickly dropped as the contents of the box began to reveal themselves beneath the styrofoam. At first, I thought it was a mannequin. It wouldn't be that surprising, I guess, considering we live right next door to a clothing boutique. I thought maybe there was a chance something they ordered from the store just got dropped off at the wrong place. But as I looked closer, forcing my vision to focus, my stomach sank. It was a sex doll, clear as day. No mannequin had that kind of detail. The doll came in several different pieces, the long legs lying separate to the torso, which was separate to the head. The skin was a tan shade of olive, and it's her. Hair was long, dark brown and tangled. She wasn't skinny, which was the first thing I noticed that was strange, stranger than a hyper-realistic sex doll on my doorstep. I mean, she wasn't fat either, per se, but the shape of her body was nothing like the sex dolls I had seen before on the internet. Not petite, not toned, or even overly curvy either. Looking at her body felt familiar to me, like slipping on a sock or climbing into bed, like something I had done thousands of times before. Then I saw her eyes. Brown eyes with little flecks of copper, permanently sad eyes, crinkled at the corners and downturned, with long swooping eyelashes. Her eyes. Eleanor. Before I could stop myself, I reached out, I touched her face. The skin was soft and almost oily to the touch, but I only thought about that the next day. It wasn't the first thing I noticed. The first thing I noticed was that her skin was warm. I leaped backwards, the couch scraping loudly against the floorboards. Yet another thing she would have scolded me for. The open, untouched beer landed on the cushions and tipped over, spilling everywhere. My breathing came shallow and ragged. I grabbed at my chest as if my heart might stop. I felt like it might. That was her. My Eleanor. This doll was her, down to every tiny inconspicuous detail, even down the pores on her nose and the slight cleft in her upturned chin. Outside of the panic, I felt nothing. I wasn't capable. I could feel my brain shutting down. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear anything but the ringing in my ears. I sat there in silence for what felt like an hour, until I could convince my body to move, and at that time all I could think to do was drag myself to bed and fall asleep. So that was what I did. In the morning, the first thing I felt was rage. At first, I wasn't even entirely sure why I was so angry, but it didn't take very long for it to come rushing back to me. The doll. I ripped open the box, dumping the contents out on the floor of the living room. Fueled only by my blind fury, I shuffled aggressively through the packing peanuts, refusing to look at the doll more than I was physically forced to. I had to find something, some clue as to who had sent this to me, who would be so sick in the head that they thought this was a good idea for a joke. I had half a mind to call her brother or one of her cousins who had always hated me and demand an answer, but I quickly decided against that. They would never let me see their family again, and they were all I had left of my wife. I didn't find anything but a slip of paper that fluttered out after I had completely torn through everything, with a simple message typed in the center, customer support, and then a phone number. I dialed immediately. They picked up right on the third ring. Hello, this is customer support. How may I help you today? The voice was cheerful and practiced, recited. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I had no plan other than to call, and now I was clamming up. Who are you? It was all I could think to say. The female voice on the other end of the line offered a polite laugh, not unkind but still corporate in nature. May I ask what it is that you're calling about? I swallowed hard, my eyes drifting over to the doll. My throat ached. It felt like I was coming down with something. I received, a doll. I didn't order it. I see. I heard typing on a keyboard, and I almost felt like I could see her nodding her head. Could you read me the serial number? Serial number? Should be right on the doll's head, right behind the ear. I shivered, my face crumpling. I slowly kneeled down, reaching out with trembling fingers to move her hair to the side. There was a serial number, black figures stamped into her fake skin. Right below that there was something else. I felt bile rise in the back of my throat. A little tattoo sat right behind the lobe of her ear, a small hibiscus flower. My hand flew to my own ear, touching the one that matched it. I hate this placement. I could hear her whine, as if she was saying it right next to me. A smile in her voice. They did me so wrong. Diego, why didn't you fight that guy for me? Why didn't you take him out to the parking lot? I didn't realize I was crying until I tried to speak again. Wow, what is this? Serial number? I wiped at my face, trying not to audibly sniffle. 2020715-001-143. One moment, please. I heard more typing and then silence. When she spoke again, I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or if her tone had changed slightly. I see here that you were sent one of our sample models, Diego. We do have upgrades available if you're interested. I didn't catch that she had used my name. If I had, I definitely would have questioned it. What? Who sent it? I'm not at liberty to say. I'm sorry about that. Well, I'd like to return it. The anger was coming back with a vengeance, and I felt hot all over. I don't know who would think this was fucking funny, but it's not, and I don't know what kind of company would dash. Please don't raise your voice at me. She cut me off, her voice somehow even more sickly cheerful and corporate than before. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I would like to return it. Please. I would highly advise against that. Something about the way she said it, as well as the words themselves, made me feel violently uneasy. I stammered through response, taken completely off guard. What do you mean? I don't want it. I would like to return it. What do you mean by that? If you have any other questions, we're always here. Okay? Thank you for calling customer support today. I hope everything was to your satisfaction. She didn't wait for me to reply. The line went dead, leaving me holding my phone to my ear in a silent room, my jaw slack. I felt like I could feel the doll watching me. Like Eleanor, but not. Like Eleanor, but without a soul. I Googled the customer support phone number. Nothing came up besides an address that was seemingly in the middle of nowhere, nowhere near where I lived. I hauled it into the closet, in the spare room, and closed the door. I wanted to drive it to the dump, or even just throw it back outside on the doorstep. But something stopped me. I knew it wasn't her. It was the furthest thing from her. Actually, it was some sort of disgusting, evil joke. I didn't know if it was worse if someone commissioned it or that company just sold dolls that looked exactly like my Eleanor already. Actually, I didn't know which was worse, never mind. But in a way, it was her. It looked like her. And when I moved with my hands around her waist, I was hit with an overwhelming wave of nausea. It felt just like it did the night she died. It felt just like holding her waist on the ground. Her body slumped against me, what was left of her brain leaking out onto my shoulder, her skull all but eviscerated from that gunshot wound. The gun they still hadn't been able to find, with a trigger on it that was pulled by someone they also hadn't been able to identify. I tried to forget about it, but it was that very feeling that caused me to bring the doll back out of the closet and put the pieces together, moving slowly as if I was sleepwalking. Maybe I was. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I slept next to the doll that night. I didn't use it. I would be lying if I said the thought didn't cross my mind, but it felt too wrong, too horrible to consider more than as a passing thought. It wasn't Eleanor. It was some plastic imitation. But even so, sleeping with my arms around her like I never thought I would get to do again almost made me want to believe in a god. I dressed her in some of Eleanor's old pajamas, and I fell asleep faster and more restfully than I had in weeks. It felt so real that when I woke up, I went to kiss her on the cheek before I remembered. Her body was warm in mine, her skin slightly clammy like it would be on the real Eleanor right when she woke up, when she would pry my arms off her with her nose scrunched up and mutter, "EW, we're sweaty." I called my mom, and I told her what had happened. I didn't give her all the details. The thought too awkward if nothing else to elaborate, but I was pretty sure she got the picture. It was clear she didn't believe me. She asked a lot of questions, all of them along the lines of, "Are you sure you didn't order it and forget about it?" And, "Honey, are you feeling stable enough to be alone right now?" All of this was about a week ago. I've tried a few more times to tell people about this. I even talked to her brother, but no one seemed to believe me. When I show them the doll, they change how they're talking to me, and they look at me with eyes that are full of disgust, only thinly veiled by pity. I know I'm losing them now. They've stopped even pretending to humor me. I can't even blame them, because I can't even bring myself to get rid of her. She's all I have. I know this is embarrassing. I know you're all going to make fun of me for this. I just can't let her go. I can't do it. She just feels so real. I probably wouldn't be posting this, though, if it weren't for the email I got today from the funeral home. Something happened to Eleanor's body. They won't give me all the details over email or over the phone, but they want to come down right away. So I'm going to do that after I finish writing this down. But that isn't the worst part. Not by far. Last night I noticed that Eleanor is starting to smell. Story 5. My neighbor's 12-foot skeleton killed the HOA president. Derek first got the skeleton a couple of years ago. One night while I was brushing my teeth, I gazed out the window. In the light of my motion sensor light, I saw Derek reaching into the trunk of his car. Out he pulled a large cardboard box with the Spirit Halloween logo on it. I had never seen have a bigger smile, even bigger than the one at his wedding. The next morning, while also brushing my teeth, I saw a 12-foot skeleton sitting in Derek's front lawn. It stood looking across the street, with its hand in a waving position. Over the next few years, I saw that skeleton in his yard for a majority of the time. Every time a new holiday would come around on the calendar, the skeleton would be put into a new outfit. Uncle Sam hat for 4th of July, Santa hat for Christmas, and just plain old skeleton for Halloween. Derek really loved the skeleton. I would see him quickly rush inside any time it was slightly too windy or rainy. Even during the town's tornado warning scare last year, before retreating to his basement, he collected the skeleton outside. But in October of last year, we got an HOA. I don't even know who wanted it, to be honest. They just showed up one day and made me cut my azaleas because they did not fit my house's color scheme. From the start, nobody really liked them. Like all HOAs, one of those people was obviously Derek. One day while walking past his house, I saw Derek cleaning up the skeleton bit, so I threw him a wave, instead of waving back. He came up to me on the sidewalk to talk to me. "Hey man, I was just wondering if you had my back if I decided to stand up to the HOA. I just read through the rules, and they said that I would not be allowed to display Jerry outside of October. I'm planning on keeping him up as a protest." "Jerry? Are you talking about the skeleton?" "Oh, yeah. Sorry. Forgot that's an inside joke between me and me. So if the HOA shows up and tells me to take it down, could you speak on my behalf in the HOA meeting?" I felt a little bit pressured. Saying no felt a little bit rude with how much Derek loved Jerry and all. But since the skeleton has always been a joy to see, and since I also hated the HOA, I told him yes. He repeatedly thanked me with his hands together. So when November 1st rolled around, I was prepared to see Jerry disappear. But I wasn't prepared for it to happen on November 1st. I was on my porch, sipping warm black coffee from my Jack Skellington mug. Jerry stood with his fists up, ready to fight any HOA members. Across the street, Justin was stapling Christmas lights to his roof while standing on a ladder. He had headphones in, bobbing his head to what was probably Mariah Carey. In Justin's yard was an army of Christmas inflatables. Santas, reindeer, Grinches, and many others flooded his yard. This made me mildly annoyed. As I was shaking my head behind Justin's back, a white SUV pulled in front of Derek's house. The door opened and out popped a middle-aged woman wearing a sweater vest. It was the HOA president. Pretty sure her name was Jasmine or something like that. So Jasmine marched up Derek's path and knocked on his glass screen door. While waiting for an answer, she checked her Apple Watch for the time. She probably read a time around 8 a.m. After a short wait, Derek opened the door wearing a robe. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Jasmine spoke up. "Yeah, hello, Derek. I was just wondering if you were aware of what day it was?" She said demeaningly, like she was speaking to a child who had to be taught a lesson. "Oh, yeah, pretty sure it's Saturday." "Not that kind of day, the other kind," she said as she grabbed her nose and shook her head side to side. "Oh, sorry, it will be November 1st. Have a good Halloween last night." "No, my kids got all hyper and wouldn't sleep. But to why I'm here, what is that?" she said as she pointed at the 12-foot skeleton behind her. "That's Jerry," he said while chuckling. "No, it's not. It is a violation of the HOA guidelines. No Halloween decorations up outside of October. Take it down immediately, please." "No, I'm not going to do that." Derek's cheerful, goofy tone ended. He spoke with a sternness I had not heard from him before. "Okay, well, if you're not, then I will. And I will be forced to put in the dumpster and fine you." She crossed her arms. "If you do that, I will literally call the cops on you. That is theft." Well, let's just see whose side they are on. Once Jasmine finished saying that, she turned around and walked for the skeleton. As she did, Derek pulled out his iPhone and dialed a number and held it to his ear. He then went inside with the phone. Jasmine got up behind Jerry and put her hands on the pelvis and pushed. Jerry came tumbling over on the grass. When he hit the ground, his skull popped off and rolled to the sidewalk. Jasmine walked to it and it picked it up. As her back was turned, Jerry stood himself up. Jasmine walked over to her SUV and opened the trunk. As Jasmine was waiting for the trunk to open, Jerry, still headless, walked to her and lightly tapped on her shoulder. "What do you want, Dash?" She couldn't finish her sentence. She stood looking directly up at Jerry. Jerry gently pulled his skull out of her hands. Jasmine stood this mouth agape, stunned, unable to move. I have to say, when I was this, I too was rather frightened, but I stayed sitting on my porch to watch what would happen next. Jerry would then grab Jasmine by the neck and lift her off the ground. Jasmine reached for Jerry's bony hands to free herself. She kicked her legs to assist the escape, but Jerry must have had a lot of invisible muscle, for she did not come close to escaping. Jerry then changed his grip on her from her neck to her ankle. She swayed back and forth upside down. Have you guys ever watched The Avengers? If you have, then you are familiar with the scene where the Hulk grabs Loki and repeatedly slams Loki on the ground. That is what Jerry would do to Jasmine. Over and over on the pavement of the road, Jerry would slam Jasmine with all of his force. Jasmine didn't make a single sound after the first swing. After a dozen or so swings, Jasmine was dead. Most of her upper body was deformed, and her sweater vest was now soaked in blood. I sat in silence, in disbelief of what just happened. I always wonder what Derek's reaction to that was. Was it like when a parent finds out their kid is a bully in school? Was it like when a parent's child goes to prison? Or was he proud of what he saw? I really have no clue. Jerry looked up from Jasmine's body and changed his focus across the street. He breathed heavily, then started to walk towards Justin. I could hear Justin faintly singing some Christmas song. I thought of how good those headphones were, to where he couldn't hear a 12-foot skeleton approach him from behind. I thought about asking him what brand they were. Too bad I wouldn't get the chance. Once Jerry made it to the ladder, he grabbed the top of it and threw it over. I heard Justin let out a yell before I heard him and the ladder make a thump sound. I wasn't actually able to see what happened next. Most of it was blocked by Justin's minivan. But based on the movement of Jerry, Justin was being stomped to death. Justin called out for help, but it was difficult to hear over the roar of inflatables. I saw Justine's wife quickly glance out the curtains, but after seeing what was out there, she promptly shut them. Jerry gave a few more good stomps before stopping. He then turned his attention to the inflatables in the front yard. He tore through all of them, popping Santa and killing Rudolph. tearing through the Grinch and unplugging Frosty, standing in a pile of now dead Christmas cheer. He changed his attention to me. I could tell he was looking at my Jack Skellington mug. So I said aloud in a shaky voice, "Sorry, it's actually a Halloween movie, so if you have some problem with Christmas, this is not the place." He marched toward me anyway, across the street, through my yard, and up to my porch. I tried to quickly stand up and run, but before I could do the running part, Jerry grabbed me by the neck and pulled me out from the porch. He started to punch me in the stomach a few times, knocking the air out of me. As he did, I saw a police cruiser down the road, probably the one called by Derek. I hoped that Jerry didn't kill me before the cruiser got there. The time it took for the cruiser to drive those few blocks felt like forever. When it finally did get to my block, I saw the nod his head and drive away, while saying to himself, "Nope, not today." I was now on my own, repeatedly getting punched by a 12-foot skeleton. I remembered this was how Houdini died. If Houdini couldn't survive this, how could I? Then for a second, Jerry stopped punching me. For a second, I thought he was letting me go, but then I was lifted over his head and flung across the street. I flew over Justin's car and landed on the fallen ladder. After hitting the ground, it took me a second to understand what was around me, but after a few deep breaths, that went away. The first thing I saw was Justin's body. Oh, yeah, he was stomped to death. The first thing I heard was music coming from two places. The first was from Justin's headphones in the grass. They were playing Jingle Bell Rock. The second was from a caroling minivan coming down the road towards me. I saw Jerry walking toward me. Before he could pick me up again, I snatched Justin's headphones. Oh, they're Beats brand. Jerry then picked me up by the skull. He placed my head in between his two massive hands. He started to squeeze. I could feel the pressure in my head building up. My eyes started to pop out of socket. But before my head could be crushed like a jack-o'-lantern on November 1st, I slid the headphones over Jerry's ears. He immediately dropped me. Jerry fell backwards on top of a popped Santa. He started to shake, his bones clacking together like a xylophone. The minivan was 1 block away. I quickly think of something cool to say while I would end Jerry's life. It had to be something sort of relevant to Christmas or Halloween. Then I thought of something. This is what you have to understand, Jerry. Christmas, that's in 54 days. But Halloween, that's in 364. So whether you like it or not, it's Merry freaking Christmas. As I finished the coolest thing I ever said, I pulled my foot back and launched it forward and planted it in Jerry's chin. His head launched off like a firework, flying off into the street and perfectly underneath the front wheel of the caroling minivan. Without any difficulties, Jerry's skull was crushed. The family stopped singing Jingle Bells to ask what they had just hit. I looked down. The skeleton had stopped shaking and laid still in the ground. I kicked at his ribs. He didn't move. I walked across the street and knocked on Derek's door to tell him what happened. When he opened, he already had tears in his eyes. He didn't even cry at his wedding, I thought. Before I could say anything, Derek ran across the street and held Jerry in his arms. I went inside my own house and called the police. Not sure who will go to prison for this one. Case still hasn't happened yet. Probably a bit hard to make sense of it all. Me and Derek have talked, and we have no clue what causes Jerry to all of a sudden come alive like that. But now, if you were to drive around our neighborhood, you will not see any 12-foot skeletons named Jerry. Instead, you'll see a flagpole in Derek's front yard, forever flying a skull and crossbones, with a small plaque at the bottom that reads, "In memory of the one and only Jerry." Story 6. About my fractured mind. The first thing I remember is the snow. I stared out the window at the forest, freshly draped in a blanket of pure white. The cold seems to seep into the darkened room and into my bones. I glanced down and pulled my sweater tighter around myself, feeling a shiver run through my thin frame. The snow-covered forest looked so bright in the midday sun, but the room was dark, cold, and unfamiliar. I was seated in a thickly padded chair facing a desk. My clothes were simple but comfortable, gray sweatpants and sweater and house shoes. The door opened as I began to stand. The noise startled me more than I thought it should have, and I flinched back away from it. A man stood in the doorway, looking over a clipboard. He was a tall, bald black man with wire-frame glasses. I noticed he was wearing a lab coat and assumed he was a doctor of some kind. He closed the door behind him and smiled as he looked up from the clipboard. "How are we doing today?" he asked as he made his way across the room. I cleared my throat and spoke. I stopped. My voice, it was different, deeper and more aged. He sat down at the desk across from me and gave me a curious look. "Are you all right?" I nodded and continued. "I think so. I'm just a little confused. I'm not quite sure where I am or how I got here." A brief expression of disappointment crossed his face, which he quickly covered with a sympathetic nod. "Yes, of course. Why don't you tell me the last thing you remember, and I will do my best to fill in the blanks." I thought for a moment. I couldn't remember much of anything out of the ordinary. Well, I had just gotten home from work, and I was about to sit down and eat dinner with my family. "Where are they, by the way? Are they all right?" He sat back in his chair and studied me for a moment. I waited, but he said nothing. Well, I prompted. I was beginning to feel panic rising in my chest. "Where's my family? Where am I?" Still he said nothing. "Answer me, damn it." I shouted, "What the hell is going on?" He raised his hands in a calming motion as the door opened and two big men in scrubs stepped into the office. "Is everything okay, Dr. Ross?" asked the bigger of the two men. "It's fine, Carl," said the doctor, waving them away. With a nod, they stepped back out into the hall and closed the door. "What is happening?" I asked in a slightly calmer tone. Dr. Ross cleared his throat and leaned forward on his elbows. "This isn't going to be easy to hear." My heart pounded as tears began to fill my eyes. "Where's my family?" He stared into my eyes and spoke in an eerily calm voice. "This is the Orion Mental Health Institute. You are a patient here, and you have been a patient here since you were 16. The statement stunned me for a moment. I shook my head. If this is some kind of joke, it's in really fucking bad taste. "Now tell me where my family is," I said, standing up from my chair. He leaned back and spread his hands. "I'm afraid it isn't a joke. And I'm afraid this isn't the first time we've had this conversation. This is such bullshit. Where's my wife and daughter?" I shouted and punched the desk. The two men came back in at the sound of commotion. I whirled on them and raised my fists. "Don't you fucking come near me." "Please, Gage, calm down," said the doctor. "Just sit down and talk to me." "Shut up," I demanded, pointing at him. "I don't know what you people want with me, and I don't care. I am leaving." I tried to rush past the two men. I had to get out of that place. I had to find my family. But they were quick. They caught me easily. I fought them as hard as I could, swinging out with wild punches and making contact with few of them. But after a brief struggle, they pinned me to the floor. I screamed and raged at them. Try anything to get loose. Suddenly there was a pinch on the back of my neck, and slowly the fight went out of me. My vision faded to a pinpoint as I slipped into unconsciousness. When I woke up, I was on my side. My body ached and my head was pounding. I tried to sit up, but my arms wouldn't move. I looked down to see them wrapped tightly across my chest. Claustrophobia set in, and I began to panic. I tried to move, but the straitjacket held me in place. "Help!" I shouted. "Someone please help me." But no one came. I screamed and screamed, struggling against my restraints. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to wriggle myself out of the straitjacket, but it was no use. After a while, I managed to get to my feet, but I had nowhere to go. The room was small and padded. I stood at the door and screamed for help until my throat was raw. Eventually, I slumped back to the floor and began sobbing. Why was this happening to me? What had I done to deserve this? Where was my family? And why had the doctor called me Gage? After a few more hours, exhaustion took its toll, and I fell into a dreamless sleep. When I woke up, I was back in the office. I groggily glanced around the room. Snow was falling on the forest outside. It struck me again how bright it looked. "Good morning," said Dr. Ross. I hadn't realized he was sitting at the desk. "How are we feeling today?" I glared at him. Fuck you. He smiled and nodded. So about the same then. I started to stand but sat back down when I noticed the two big men were watching me from inside the office now. Why am I here? I asked. I told you yesterday you have been a patient here for some time now, nearly 15 years. I nodded. So you said, but why? For your own safety. I chuckled. Sure. Well, I'm not feeling very safe right now. He nodded. I can certainly understand that. And I do apologize for having to restrain you overnight. But you did give us quite a fight. I glanced back at the two men by the door. One of them had a visibly broken nose. Look, I said, doing my best to stay calm. I don't know who you think I am, but I'm pretty sure you're the wrong guy. Do we? He asked, raising his eyebrows. You call me Gage. That's not my name. Oh, and who are you today? I sat up a little straighter. My name is Nick. I have a wife and daughter. I live in a small town in Oklahoma. I don't belong here. Ross nodded as he opened a file folder and began to take notes on what I was saying. I smiled, thinking he was finally listening to me. It had to have been some kind of mistake that I wound up here. This would be cleared up and I will be going home to my family. You can call my wife. She will confirm everything I'm saying. He number is 6. He said, cutting me off. I blinked in confusion. What? He sat back and smiled at me. That makes your 6 personality. I shook my head. No, you're not listening to me. I'm not crazy. My name is Nick and... Are you sure? He asked, cutting me off. Are you sure you're not Sam, the detective from the future? Or the half-dead drifter who can talk to ghosts? Or maybe you're the astronaut, hell-bent on saving humanity from an alien virus? I shook my head in disbelief. What? Those are stories. Stories I wrote. They aren't other personalities. I'm a writer. He squinted at me in confusion. You know the stories of these people I've mentioned? Yes, of course I do. I wrote them. I'm a fiction writer. These are stories I made up and posted online. He leaned forward and said, tell me every one of the stories you've written in as much detail as you possibly can. So I did. It took a while, but I told him all the stories I had written, named all the characters, and gave hyper-specific details. When I was done, he sat back and studied me in silence for a long while. Finally, he said, that is very interesting. None of your other personalities know anything about each other, but you seem to be fully aware of each of them. I sighed. I'm not just aware I created them, they are just characters. So you say, but aren't you just another character as well then? I'm real. I made them up. How do you know you're real? He asked. I shook my head. Because I'm standing here talking to you. I'm here right now. This is real. I'm real. And I have a real family I have to get back to. He sighed long and said, I am sorry, but you don't have a family. Nick isn't real. Your name is Gage, and you have been my patient here for nearly 15 years. God damn it. You aren't listening, I'm telling you. That is enough. I'm trying to help you. Nick isn't real. I snapped. I leapt across the desk at him. I'll fucking show you how real I am. I shouted, grabbing the front of his shirt, ready to drive my fist through his big fucking head. The 2 guards caught me before I could do any real damage. And the next thing I knew, I was back in a padded cell. I spent the rest of that day in the straitjacket, squirming and pleading for help, for someone to listen to me, to hear what I was trying to tell them, that I wasn't crazy, that I was real. That night, I thought of what Ross had said about my stories being other personalities. It seemed ridiculous, but I felt doubt begin to creep its way into my fractured mind. What if he was right? How did I really know that I was the real me? My sleep was filled with dreams that were more like memories. I remembered driving on an endless road, filled with horrific nightmares in more detail than I could have ever imagined. I remembered bumming my way around the country, meeting ghosts, mostly try to avoid them, and sometimes helping them move on. I remembered a city of neon lights and a murder I had to solve. I remembered being infected with the alien consciousness, the feeling of it controlling my mind and body. Finally, I remembered Gage. His life was a tapestry of pain and trauma. He retreated into himself when he was at his weakest. Imagine scenarios where he wasn't weak, where he was a hero, He lived in his head, in those fantasies. To him, reality was misery. As I walked through the dreaming realm, I began to understand, to see the truth threaded among the stories and memories and fantasies. In all the lives I've lived, I knew now what I needed to do. How are we feeling this morning? Asked Dr. Ross. I smiled and took a deep breath. I'm feeling good. He raised his eyebrows at me. And who am I speaking with today? Me. He grinned. With you? I glanced around the room at the two guards at the door and the bright snow outside the window. Ross cleared his throat and asked again, which you am I speaking with? All of me. You're still Nick, aren't you? I'm whoever I need to be. You need to be yourself, Gage. I nodded. Yeah, you keep saying that, but I don't think you know what it means to be yourself. And you do? He asked. I think I'm starting to. Ross leaned back and studied me for a moment. You seem unusually calm. Are you sure you're still Nick? You haven't mentioned your family yet. I smiled. They're not here. But I know how to get back to them. How? I smiled wide and closed my eyes, taking a deep breath and surrendering control. A few moments later, I opened my eyes to find the two guards unconscious on the floor and sirens blaring throughout the institute. Dr. Ross cowered behind his desk, staring at me like I was some kind of demon. I could hear voices shouting from the hall. They were getting closer, and I was running out of time. I grabbed the chair I had been sitting in. The cushions may have been extra padded foam, but the legs were made of metal. I swung the chair as hard as I could, smashing it to the window to the forest. I stepped up and looked over the edge, for stories up at the parking lot below. Gage! Shouted Ross. Don't. I can help you. I can fix you. I looked back and met his eyes. You couldn't fix him, Ross, and you'd never have let him out. You just lock him up time and time again. This is where Gage's story ends. I leaned forward and let gravity do the rest. I stared out at the snow-covered forest as I fell. It really was beautiful. Suddenly I jolted awake in bed, breathing heavily. I sigh in relief as I realize it is my bed. I smiled as I looked over to see my wife sleeping next to me. I gently leaned over and kissed her cheek before going to check on my daughter, still fast asleep. I headed to my office and opened my computer and began typing this. Maybe it was just a dream. It probably was. But what if it was something more? What if Gage was me in another universe? Calling out for help to the only one who could ever really understand him. I mean, that's what I did in the dream. I needed someone who could fight. Someone who could give me the opportunity to help set Gage free. I have no idea who it was that took control. But does it really matter? It was me, or at least a version of me. This dream, or whatever it was, has thrown my whole conception of reality into question. I told Ross I was real because I was talking to him, because I was there, but I'm not even sure that was real. So how can I be sure that I am even real? Am I real because I believe I am, or because others perceive me? As I sit here staring off into the middle distance, into the space between spaces, it's like I can see it. The words that I have been typing laid out in reverse on a screen, a face illuminated in the darkness. Am I only real because you are reading this? If so, what happens when I stop typing? Story 7. The Radio Witch. My grandmother was one of the first female taxi drivers in my city, Zaragoza. Because of that, she had seen and heard a lot of things. As a kid, I loved staying over at her place and listening to her tell, again and again, the story of the time a robber held a knife to her throat, and she still had the guts to drop him off at the police station and charge him the full fare. Also, by the time she was 80, she'd had a tracheotomy and spoke like a robot. It scared me and fascinated me in equal measure. Throat cancer, 7 heart attacks, late onset diabetes. None of it ever took away her sleep or her nightly ritual of 2 glasses of coffee cream liqueur. She was at peace because, as she often said, the radio which had told her the day she would die, and that day hadn't come yet. I never asked her about the radio witch. I thought it was just an expression, until one summer afternoon, she called a whole family over for lunch. After dessert, she looked around the table and said, "Tomorrow I'm going to die. Tomorrow is the day the radio witch told me." We laughed it off. She looked great for 90. Her latest tests were excellent, especially considering her medical history. She was also a notorious prankster, the kind of person who could keep a straight face while telling you the most absurd lie. She refused to see any doctor. That night, as I stayed with her until she went to bed, something about the way she hugged me made my stomach knot. It felt final. When I asked why she was so certain, she told me a story she had never shared before. Over 40 years ago, during her taxi driving days, she listened religiously to a late-night radio show that was wildly popular in Zaragoza. One of the recurring guests was a fortune teller who had quite a reputation. My grandmother had lost a bet with a fellow driver who also listened to the program. The loser had to call in and ask the fortune teller the exact day of their death, the witch resisted at first. But after some pushing, she relented and gave my grandmother a date, August 12th, 2024. That's tomorrow, my grandmother told me, and she was never wrong. The next day, she died. Her death left us all in shock. There was no real explanation. I mean, technically she was very old and her body had been through a lot. But why did she die when she seemed healthier than ever? Nobody mentioned the radio, which, even though we had all heard it, it became a taboo. My mother filed a negligence complaint against the doctors, citing a minor dosage error in one of my grandmother's medications. It was a kind of clerical mistake that had happened before with no harm done, but it was easier to focus our energy on that than face the elephant in the room. The doctors had performed an autopsy, something rarely done when someone that old, with so many conditions, dies in bed, but they were obligated. The cause of death was as strange as death itself. My grandmother had a piece of metal, thin as a needle, lodged near her heart, overlooked in every chest x-ray she'd ever had. It must have entered her body when she was a child and stayed there her whole life, until, for some reason, on the night of August 12, 2024, it shifted by a millimeter and tore her aorta. A year ago today. Nobody at home wants to talk about it, but I can't stop wondering, who was the radio witch? Story 8. My friend disappeared from an abandoned subway stop. I found her, but she can't even remember her name. What is this place? I asked Kiki. It used to be the subway stop for City Hall. Kiki said. Kiki was a militant lesbian who worked as a high-class escort specializing in bondage and sadomasochism. She was an urban explorer. 2. Urban exploration, if you're not in the know, is the exploration of man-made structures, usually abandoned ruins or hidden components of the man-made environment. Thank you, Wikipedia. We met because she was auditing a textile/surface design class at my fashion institute. Kiki is the coolest human being I know. She is also super hot, and since I am the opposite of super hot, I appreciate that she hangs out with me. I'm not jealous of her at all. She sparked up a joint and took a pull before offering it to me. "No thanks," I said. She shrugged. I felt uncool. It happens. We were in what looked like a railway depot for ancient trains. Straddling the tracks was a walkway with one steeply curved wall that started at the floor on one side and arced all the way to the floor on the other side. The vaulted ceiling was frescoed in scenes of what was once called progress. Skyscrapers being built, steamships teeming with immigrants pulling into harbor, men in formal dress shaking hands with indigenous tribesmen. The whole arcade was smattered with glittering tiles and colored glass. "I guess it's true," I said. "They really don't make them like they used to. You'd think that the city would open this for people. I bet you could charge admission to this place." "Doll, if I could teach the municipal government anything, it would be that you should always make someone pay any time they enter one of your orifices." Kiki's smile was mischievous. I clicked my tongue and rolled my eyes. "Not everything has to do with peddling ass." I said, "No, you're right. There's also the weather. I heard an alert from Kiki's phone. "You need to take that?" I said. She took her phone out of her pocket and checked it. "Shit. Speaking of, one of my regulars just opened up." Kiki sighed. "Some old dude." I said. She groaned in exasperation. "I have to go." She tucked her phone in her jeans back pocket. "You coming with?" I looked behind me at the rest of the arcade I hadn't yet explored. I turned back to Kiki. "You know, I think I'm going to look around a little bit longer, but I'll meet you for drinks tonight if you're free after your thing." "You got it, slut." Kiki came and grabbed my skull before planting a kiss on my lips. I laughed. "You know, I could charge you for that." Kiki skipped out toward the exit and called back, "No way, I got loyalty points." "Bye." I heard laughter coming from far away down the tracks, somewhere in the distant darkness. I went go look. I'll spare you the cheap suspense of me walking through the tunnel's darkness. I got where I was going. I came to an arched entryway. Beyond it, I saw a huge, open concourse with vendor stalls around the sides and zigzagging through the middle. I looked up at a wooden sign, hanging from the archway on 2 pieces of frayed rope. The sign read, "Ghoul's Hypogean Bazaar." I walked in and started browsing. The place was wild. A tiny old lady wearing a peasant's babushka was selling live monkeys. Another stall was lined with refrigerators, a cardboard sign in front advertising, "Cryoprecipitate and umbilical cord blood available for purchase." I passed by a tent filled with middle-aged women, all of them at least 6 feet tall. They were dusky, every one of them with a severe hunchback, and formed a circle around 2 of their kind, who were in the middle of playing some strange variation of craps that involved slaughtering a live chicken. Elder worthies sat on stools outside the circle and toothlessly screamed while throwing brown liqueur on competitors. At least I hoped that's what it was. I came to the edge of the market. A lonely brick-and-mortar shop stood apart there from all other commerce. Outside the shop, there were empty brass cages that looked like they belonged in a 19th century millionaire's menagerie of live animals bought on safari. There were chain manacles and steel water bowls inside of each cage. I looked at the storefront window. These characters were written on the glass in gilt lettering. I walked into the store through a flap made out of a pungent-smelling rawhide. An old woman sat behind the counter. I had the unexplainable feeling that she'd been sitting there waiting for me. She looked at me. "Yes. Hi, what is this place?" "Skin care and beauty supply." "Oh, what kind of products do you sell?" "For you, only one," she said. "What does that mean?" She creaked up off her seat on ancient bones. She was the tallest human being I'd ever seen. Her flesh hung slack, as loose as someone who'd fought morbid obesity their whole life and finally won. "It means, Jerica, that if you want to buy something here, there is only one thing I will sell you." The lady knew my real first name. Nobody at school even knew my real name. "What is it?" I asked. The giantess turned around and reached in a coat rack right behind her. She pulled out what looked like a barn coat made out of rawhide. She draped it over her arm with her opposite hand and offered it to me for inspection. "Can I touch it?" She nodded down at me. "By all means." I touched the coat. It was so soft. An electric thrill ran a circuit around my body. I smelled jasmine. My fingers were numb. I felt like I had just had the most restful sleep. Something prodded my pleasure center. 2. It was like sexual titillation combined with opioid intoxication. "Can I try it on?" "Yes," the Sagittary giant said. "But I should tell you, it's only for rent. I rarely sell something outright." "Why?" "Let's have you try it on." She came behind me and held the coat. I slid my arms back into the sleeves. The rawhide touched my body, and I orgasmed. Pleasure racked my body as I felt the floor. I tasted something like a rich chocolate cake in my mouth. An atomic pleasure bomb had been dropped in the middle of my brain. The old giantess watched me, but seemed indifferent to my embarrassing display. When I was done and had some control over my body again, she held out her hand. I took it, and she helped me to my feet. "I'm sorry," I said. I couldn't look her in the eye. My face burned red with shame. She reached down and hooked a gnarled finger under my chin, pointing my face up at hers. A woman should never have to apologize for her own pleasure. Never. Then she turned me around toward a body-length mirror, and I saw I was transformed. I was still me, but I was beautiful. Like I was my own fraternal twin who'd won the genetic lottery. A perfect figure instead of the chubby pair I snuck under sweats. A pouty heart-shaped face like a girlish actress instead of, as my brother Tyler put it, Lariat the female cable guy. Everything about me was stunning. I had eyes to sink empires. My legs buckled as I felt an aftershock between them. What? I might have said, but I couldn't be sure. I was insensible. You'll take it, the giantess said. She wasn't asking. Yes. I suggest you not wear outside your home until you've had time to adapt. My incomprehension must have been obvious, because she added, unless you want people to see you climaxing in the middle of the street. I nodded. Oh, right. Okay, but, you'll still look the way you look right now. Beautiful. At least long enough for you to get home. I stared in the mirror. I was attracted to myself in the most biblical sense. How was that possible? How did you make this? Here, give it to me. I'll wrap it up for you. Your rental will last exactly 1 week. The giantess escorted me outside her shop. What I saw shocked me. Inside the brass cages, there were now naked women. They were lapping at their steel bowls like animals. All of them had defecated in their cages. Many were missing teeth. These captives wailed like dogs left too long at the pound. Their legs were bloody and raw from the manacle's friction. They were so filthy that I had to hold my nose. The sight was horrible, the smell was worse, and the noise of their anguish was unbearable. I looked up at the giantess, my face warped with shock. What the hell is this? These are my debtors. They don't concern you. My business with them is my own. Besides, they consent to being here as repayment on their debts. You can't do this. I knew my voice was too whiny, too meek for a liberator's task. I braced my newly trimmed gut and said with as much firmness as possible, "This is disgusting. I'm calling the police." The giantess was unfazed by my threats. She simply plucked from my hand the bag, carrying my new coat, before I could even react. "Fine," she said, "but I'm taking the coat." She turned to walk back inside her shop. I panicked. I wanted the coat. No, I needed the coat. Wait. She turned toward me again. Yes. I looked back and forth between the women in the cages and the old sadist holding my coat. That was how I was already thinking of it. My coat. I couldn't leave it behind. Well, I could call the police if I needed to once I left the bazaar. They're here voluntarily. They can leave if they want. I said. The giantess had a smile both cold and cruel. Oh, absolutely, darling. Absolutely. This debt forgiveness program is purely voluntary, all above board. I promised myself I would call the police the instant I was a safe distance from the ghouls' Hypogean Bazaar. I went out that night wearing my rawhide coat. Self-consciousness was inevitable, with the garment being so rustic and strange. I worried people would see me as a weird bumpkin dress for a southwestern ranch, somehow stranded here in the big city. If anyone even noticed my coat, they said nothing. Men and women both were too busy falling over themselves to buy me drinks. A wardrobe critique was not in the works. I went to a club I'd always been too intimidated to even get in the queue for. You know the kind of place I'm talking about. Only certified 9s and 10s past a velvet rope. 8s allowed only if they were a big enough name for TMZ on TV. I danced with people who were the sort of beautiful you only saw in advertisements for haute couture and French fragrance houses, not in the flesh. I had sex only in public places at night, or at least in places where many people could see me. I snorted things and burned things and ate things, sweated, screamed, and danced. And as I did all this and caught my reflection in every shiny surface, I fell more and more in love with a new, beautiful me. Sliding up and down on a man's waist with his back to a bathroom mirror, I stared at myself, looked into my own eyes. In witnessing my own new and foreign beauty, I gave myself an orgasm, The intensity of my self-possession was such that if I'd seen my reflection in a pool, I might have drowned trying to kiss myself. Only one thing gave me pause. In the far distance inside each reflection, I thought I saw the filthy, emaciated bodies of the naked women in cages. Not directly, though. I saw their bodies only, if at all, peripheral to my line of sight. But their rattling chains and manacles, those I could hear. Their bestial howls sounding all the way from inside their excrementitious cages, too. I forgot to call the police. Ask me how I could forget such a thing. Nevertheless, I did. But I saw those women or sensed them in the reflections of car windows and sidewalk puddles, in the gleaming curves of sleek German cars, in any surface that showed back my likeness. It felt like they were waiting to break through, and they seemed so very hateful to me. I was afraid of them. The naked women in chains. I was so afraid of them that when I left the club and returned home, I decided that I wouldn't call the police after all. I didn't know what I saw in those cages. I decided. Really, I had no idea what I'd seen, and I had a new life to live. I tried calling Kiki the next day to share the good news, to invite her over to see my transformation, but her phone sent me straight to voicemail. 1 week was too short a time to have the coat. I needed it to be mine. I went out every night and built up a repertoire of hedonism. I felt an idolater's lust for my own image. I was completely self-obsessed. Even though I was desired by the most beautiful people in the city, it was my own flesh and likeness that set me aflame. I needed to keep the coat, no matter the cost. And when I made up my mind, that was when I saw her, one of the manacled gutter puppies, naked and howling as she'd done in the bazaar. For the first time I could see her, a clear view and straight ahead in the mirror's reflection. I tried calling Kiki, but it went straight to voicemail again. After 5 days' time, I returned to my textile/surface design class. Kiki didn't show. I called her again. I'd already sent innumerable text messages. Instead of notifying me that the caller's voicemail box was full like before, Kiki's service provider informed me that the number I was calling was no longer in service, and to please check the number and try again. I'd like to say I was deeply concerned about Kiki and her disappearance, but the notion of returning the coat to the giantess disturbed me more than any missing friend ever could. I decided that the next day, I would go back to the bazaar and speak with the giantess. I couldn't surrender the coat. It took some doing, but I found it again. There was the sign reading Ghoul's Hypogean Bazaar. I entered the concourse. There were still stalls all over, but they were either poorly tended or abandoned. I passed by where I'd seen the dusky women playing their strange game of chicken slaughter dice. There was only one toothless, old woman there. She looked at me and cackled like a lunatic, then threw some of her brown liqueur at me, a small mercy it missed. I recognized the bones of the bazaar, but the flesh of commerce had decayed. It was not the bustling souk filled with curiosities and oddments I'd seen before. There was only one thing that was a feature and not a bug. When I saw a reflection while in the bazaar, I no longer saw the women in chains looking back at me. I can't describe the relief I felt when I came into view of the giantess's shop at the edge of the now empty market. Now, outside her store, there was only one brass cage. I allowed myself a delusional hope that those filth-smeared women had been freed. I pushed aside the pungent flap of rawhide and entered the shop. The giantess was sitting behind the counter, waiting for me, just as she'd done before. Her smile was etched in deep, fleshy lines in her face, but she didn't look happy. In fact, she looked mean. She brought together her fingers that were like long, knobby chicken legs eaten down a bone. And here you are, looking more beautiful than ever. If I may say so, darling, I was worried you wouldn't be back in time to return the coat. I'm back. My teeth gritted in sudden rage. The woman knew exactly what she was doing to me. She knew it was agony to come back with the coat. All's well that ends well. Go ahead and take it off, and I'll get you a receipt. She stood up behind the counter and pawed around for her receipt pad. I guessed. What happens when I return it to you? I said. The giantess continued searching among her things, making a show of picking up and putting down in various rearrangements. She didn't look at me when she answered. Why, Then I'll have it back, I suppose. No, I mean, what happens to me? I felt my throat tightening and fluid sluicing my sinuses. I was probably going to cry. Oh, the giantess was feigning revelation, I was sure, as if she'd only considered, right at that moment, what surrendering the coat would do to me. As if what happened to me after wearing it only long enough to develop a hellacious dependence had only crossed her mind for the first time today. She looked directly at me, ending her rummaging ruse. I doubted very much that this woman ever lost track of anything she owned. I'm afraid you'll be a dowdy, chubby, ugly little duckling again. Her words stung. I bit down on my tongue. Then I collected myself to state my claim. I want to keep it. You want to keep it? She said. Yes. I practically screamed at her. I was unhinged. The idea of becoming a fat, nerdy undesirable again seemed as deadly to me as Ebola fever. I was revolted by my former self. I couldn't go back to that. Yes, I said, repeated in a much softer tone. Please, please, I would like to keep it. The giantess sighed and crossed her arms. You certainly do seem very attached to it. I nodded. I'd do anything to keep it. She stretched to her true and full, terrible height, and it looked to me like she could break through the ceiling. Anything? Yes. I straightened my back. Yes, I'd do anything to keep it. Then all you have to do is tell me, darling. She came around the counter. Her sagging skin rustled in an invisible breeze. The hollows of her eyes darkened where light, not shadow, ought to have been. Tell me one more time. Tell me, and mean it with everything in your heart. The declaration I made to her was spoken with honesty and deep, deep feeling. More than I'd ever given to myself in my whole life. I would do anything to keep my... I faltered at my mistake. I cleared my throat. I corrected myself and said, I would do anything to keep this coat. The giantess grinned, her teeth sharpened on my desperation, and yellowed to the color of putrid exudate. Okay, Jerica, the coat is yours. She held out her hand for me to shake. Instead of shaking her hand, I fell to my knees in front of her. I sobbed. I thanked her. I thanked her again and again. The giantess escorted me out of her shop. A woman now occupied the lone brass cage that still remained. She wasn't clean, but she was cleaner than the caged women I'd seen before in her place. I recognized the tattoos on her body. It was Kiki. I ran to the bars of the cage. I reached through them. Kiki? Kiki, what happened? Kiki looked up at me. I no longer saw the brilliance in her eyes or the streetwise glamour that once animated her. I saw a dirty, dumb animal. If Kiki recognized me, I couldn't tell. She thrashed against her chains. I reached out for her. She snapped her teeth at my hand, catching me on the knuckle and taking off a chunk of flesh. I leapt back and fell on the floor. My hand freely bled. The giantess saw this and laughed. She delighted in my shock, my misery. I wiped tears from my eyes and accidentally smeared blood on my face. Kiki, I said. Kiki mocked me. Then, but it was no human mockery. She mocked me like an ape recreating a human master's jeers and taunts. She shouted her name back at me, getting it wrong, grunting in the pan-flute-like pant-hoot of a wild chimpanzee. Kick. Coke. When Kiki botched her own name, the giantess laughed hard enough to lose her wind and start wheezing. She fell over herself in cackling gales and screamed, "Try again, dear!" Kiki tried to imitate the laughter of the giantess. Kiki and the giantess shrieked and guffawed. Kiki in her idiot imitation of the giantess, and the giantess for love of my misery. Once Kiki started throwing her feces at me. I ran. I got home and I cried. And then I fell asleep in my new coat. I was awoken in the middle of the night by the sound of chains. I sat up in bed and heard the heavy metal links drag across the floor. I knew what the sound was. I hid underneath my bed sheets and trembled. The chain scraped and clanked along the ground. The sound became louder and louder. The bed sheets were ripped off of me. I saw the naked women who'd been imprisoned below ground. They stood swinging their chains, unmanacled to any cage. Kiki stood there with them, her body cleaner than theirs, but still stinking of shit and piss. They all exuded the vague pheromonal musk that the insane carry with them. The women shrieked, and I screamed for help. But I'd hardly begun screaming when the first woman's chain struck me in the mouth. My teeth shattered. Another woman lashed me with her metal links, striking my eyebrow. A burst of blood showered over my face. I reached up my hand and felt my eyebrow was gone. They beat me and beat me with their chains. It was the unrestrained frolic of animal violence. And while they beat me, I heard Kiki bellow with every flail of her heavy metal chains against my body and face. Kick! Coke! Story 9. What is better than a warm blanket on a cold, rainy day? The thunder rumbled with an ambiguity that made everyone at work question their footing. It was a gloomy Friday after a week of increasingly mundane chats, pings, and back and forths when the storm swept into the city. The storm clouds crashing in the background of an already gray existence made for a generally glum ambience in the office. But a long weekend was right around the corner, and a little rain was not going to dampen the plans I had for this weekend. Every tumble of thunder just pushed my brain further into the depths of my imagination. This weekend is Josh and my second anniversary, and the effort I put into planning the celebration had been extensive. From the grocery list to the shade of orange I would set the lamps, to the scent of the multiple smokeless incense packs I bought earlier in the week. Everything was planned down to every possible detail. This has always been one of my faults. Imagining the way a date, meeting, party, or any social gathering would go, to the point that even if it all happened exactly as I pictured it, I would feel let down by the simple fact that it was not as good as I had hoped. But tomorrow would be different. I was going to plan something nice without going over the top, and I would enjoy a wonderful evening with my love. It was a power flickering that brought me back to reality and reminded me to check the clock next to my desk. 5:32. With the haste of a man late for a pre-anniversary dinner with his partner, I got up and started closing the applications that had been sitting stagnant on my desktop for the past hour or so. I gathered a few belongings that I allowed within the confines of the office building and started walking out towards the elevator. I knew already it would be a minute before I would make it to the basement, where I parked my coincidentally also gray car. The elevator usually takes a pause on each floor around this time of the day. I get it. I'm trying to get home too. So why shouldn't everyone else? I make it inside my car before I see the notification from the office building on my phone. Due to the storm, all power to the garage has been shut off until further notice. Please contact Gerald with maintenance in order to arrange your exit from the parking lot. Of course, the directors can afford to earn 6-digit salaries, but refuse to greenlight the project that would allow a spare generator outside that could power the building in a situation not unlike the one I found myself in. I remained in my car, grateful for the few bars of service I at least had. I moved to message the infamous Gerald, who no doubt must be cursing whoever just sent this message, caused his phone to effectively be blown up with text messages from angry government employees. My meager plea for assistance in a sea of cries for help would likely get me nowhere, but nonetheless, I hit send. That's when the outline of a man materializes in my rear view mirror. No features, no distinct colors, no acknowledgement of standing behind my car in a dark parking garage during a power outage. Just a still shape, waiting to see what I did next. Being simultaneously naive and optimistic, I got out of the car and announced myself enthusiastically to who I obviously assumed was Gerald coming to help get me out of this godforsaken situation. Gerald got caught on something and couldn't make it right now. He sent me, spoke a raspy yet comforting voice from Silhouette, not unlike a grandfather who had seen horrors in his earlier years, but now got teary-eyed watching the Nature Channel in his retirement home. Oh, well, as long as someone is going to get me out of here. I responded firmly and slightly at ease now that the figure had a voice and an intent. The door won't open in this type of weather. Something about too high of a risk threshold for management to allow. Gerald's replacement informed me. We are going to head out the back doors. Those are manual, he says, and looks at me as if I should know that parking garages have back doors. Okay, It's a bit of a walk. I'll get in the car and you drive. I'll point the way, he says, and starts toward the passenger seat before I have a second to consider the possibility of this not being a good idea that gets me home as soon as possible. I got in the driver's seat and started the car. The man, who has yet to share his name, took the uninvited initiative to put the car in reverse, which startled me into beginning to back up. I shifted to move forwards and followed the girthy white finger pointing to go left down further into the parking garage. I have worked here for nearly a year and have yet to venture this way, but it makes logical sense for the back door of a parking garage to be deeper in the ground, right? I followed the silent finger for a couple of minutes, going deeper in a spiral toward the exit. When I rounded the final corner, I started questioning where the door was before I was interrupted by the searing pain of tearing flesh in my thigh. I took the time I had left to scream out a few profanities which, looking back, did nothing to aid my case. Before I knew it, I had a white cloth over my face, and the gray I was used to went black. I came to when my car crashed into the final wall of the parking garage. No exit in sight. I was groggy from the chemicals just thrust into my esophagus, and in the midst of an active car crash. So it took a few seconds to feel the restrictiveness of the staples that were binding my clothes and parts of my skin to the leather chair of my Prius. Seeing the blood weeping from my inner thigh, where I was unfortunate enough to have a little extra skin caught in the freshly shot staple, caused a muffled sob to escape my chest. I looked to my right where I expected to see my passenger from a few minutes ago. To my surprise, which is a surprise in itself, he was gone. As my next move in my unexpected fight for my life at the bottom of this nightmare parking situation, I looked around to see if I had any chance of leaving this place. I had just enough time to read the wall in front of me before I saw the passenger again standing as a shadow behind my car. This time with a source of light illuminating a face that I had seen once before. It was the guy who told Josh and I that the queers are all gonna burn in hell a few weeks ago on the train. That's when the black spray paint I noticed painted on the wall in front of my smashed car hood made sense. Revelation 21 verse 8. The pieces were coming together in my mind when the source of light illuminating the putrid monster's face came to fruition as a flame connected to a Molotov cocktail delicately twirling through the air and connecting with a running motor in my newly exposed car hood. The fire linking with my skin inch by inch was the last thing I felt. The flames crept over my body in a way that was beyond pain and instead engulfed me in the warmest blanket I have ever felt. Story 10. Help is on the way. The tow company had assured me as I leaned against my vehicle. That was 3 hours ago. She was an old model, a discontinued stick shift from the 90s. Leather seats, silver detailing, a pearly blue paint job. Currently half swallowed by a muddy ditch in the middle of a rainstorm that showed no sign of stopping. The engine was probably on its final days anyhow, but she could not die today. It wasn't an option. I dialed again. As I stood there on that empty dirt road, rain slipping past the collar of my shirt, the call failed. I'd been trying to get any kind of confirmation for the past few hours. When the call did cut through, there was no voice on the other end. Service was spotty on this nameless stretch of land. Rows of pines stretched out like fingers cursing the swollen sky. What were once potholes had long since turned to frothing pools, consuming the red clay and sucking at my boots as I sloshed my way back to the driver's side door. I'm not one to divulge personal details on the web. All you need to know is this. Traveling is what I do when it all goes wrong. When life gets unbearable, I stuff the trunk with enough supplies for a good long while and set out. I know people. I can talk my way into a bed and a bath if I'm lucky, or at least a couch to crash on. If all goes well on these outings, I pick up some temporary peace along the way. This time, I'd gone upstate to visit an acquaintance, Kay, way out in the sticks. I thought I'd be staying longer, but about 2 days and he made it pretty clear our deal had run its course. That was when the rain started. After our fight, I think Kay offered to let me crash one more night while we waited out the storm. I brushed him off, told him I didn't need pity. I could handle a little rain. When I began this trek, I'd set out looking for a clear head. Instead, I found myself a throbbing headache, half a pack of stolen Lucky Strikes, and a stranded car in the middle of God knows where. The stranding itself is a blur. Listen, I hadn't been thinking straight when I gunned onto that unpaved road. Before I knew it, the floodwaters were sliding up past the tires. When the engine sputtered out, I just sat there for a while, searching for the will to face the deep shit I was in. Then, seeing as I had no choice, I made the call. So there I sat 3 hours later. My cell phone battery read 1%. The daylight was running low, taking in the desolate dirt path and endless repeating pines. I was acutely aware of the fact that, for perhaps the first time in my life, I was utterly alone. I had just popped in another CD and lit up a cig when the crunch of what could only be footsteps made me freeze. I glanced in the rear view. Nothing but empty road stretched out behind. The sound came again, louder. It seemed to approach from somewhere ahead, closer to the driver's side. I flicked on my headlights and peered out toward the pines. Someone was there. The person stood just far enough away for the dim yellow light to obscure most detail aside from general clothing, height, and posture. It appeared to be a fairly tall man, wearing a ratty red flannel and torn jeans. He leaned to one side like he had a weak leg. As he stepped down from the shoulder onto the road, I noticed a slight unsteadiness in how he carried himself. Drunk, I would have guessed, except for the strange grace with which this person corrected every misstep. It was mesmerizing, like a dance. He would stumble forward, torso and arms first, before his legs hurried to catch up. Then he would stand fully upright, swaying like a reed in the breeze. All the while, he kept his face turned completely away. In other circumstances, that strange movement alone would have made me hit the gas. I am not brave. I don't pretend to be. But in this case, running was not an option. I opted for the next best thing. Silence. The man lurched on, slowly but surely crossing the road in front of my stalled vehicle. That's when the track began. The heavy bass and drum thrummed through the speaker system, marking the start of the metal mix I'd thrown on without thinking. Did I ever think? I twisted the volume knob to 0 in a matter of seconds, but the worst had happened already. He'd heard me. The man did not turn his head in the full beam of my headlights. However, I could see that he was looking. His head was tilted up and twisted away at an extreme angle, like he'd been looking over his shoulder and got stuck that way. But his eye, the only one I could see from here, was wide open, bloodshot, and trained right on me. Then he was running towards my car. Not like a man, but like an animal. He flung himself in my direction like a rag doll being thrown. So off balance that he collapsed forward onto his hands, head still contorted at that terrible angle. He splashed headlong into the floodwater, like a dog cavorting in a river, barreling toward me on all fours. In that split second, I considered my options. Pistol in the glove box? No. Lend it to someone back home. Police? God, no. They wouldn't make it in time, and even if they did, I could not take my chances with the law for personal reasons I will not disclose here. The man, the animal. The thing in the road closed in, and all I could do was lock my doors and pray. A blaring honk split the air. The soft yellow glow of my headlights was rapidly overtaken by a blinding white. In the rear view I saw it, a huge white pickup truck. It pushed past my car, sending a wave of brown water up over the windows. I looked through the windshield again, dreading what I'd find, but the man in the flannel was gone. My heart pounded. My head swam. Everything felt indescribably wrong. Like a bad high, the white pickup parked in a drier patch of road up ahead, without dimming its brights. A man stepped out. He was middle-aged, balding, and wore a blue mechanic's jumpsuit. After a moment of careful observation, I decided to exit my car as well. Looks like you could use some help, the mechanic called out. I just stared. He was already walking over anyway, rolling up his sleeves. He didn't seem to be the tow I'd called for. At this point, I was just happy to see a friendly face. Better put that thing out, he gestured to the lit cigarette. I'd forgotten I was holding it. Why? The smoke, he said, readying himself to push my car. Lures, Em. Who? Put it in neutral, he grunted. I obliged, then splashed back around to help. Digging my own heels into the mud, I pushed alongside him until we could feel the wheels loosening. Slowly but surely, they began to roll. It took us another 10 minutes or so to shove the dead vehicle onto relatively dry land. At one point, I had to jump into the driver's seat again and steer the thing to prevent it from sliding back into the ditch. As I did, my eyes were drawn to the tree line. A bit of red fabric fluttered there, barely sticking out of the brush. I felt ill. "Sir," I called back to the older man. "Do you have a tow?" A beat of silence followed. Once the car was safely out of the danger zone, I climbed out and asked again. He shook his head. "No," he said. "I've got a friend." He began to get back into his truck. I thought about asking for a ride instead. Something rooted me to the spot, even in my unease. That something kept me from claiming shotgun and begging him to take me to the nearest motel. Maybe it was my own ego, the same stupid pride that had me driving through a flash flood in the wetlands of the Deep South after refusing to take a favor from someone I'd once called a friend. "You just sit tight," the mechanic called out the window. "Help is on the way." I watched the truck's high beams disappear into the darkness, shrinking into distant searchlights, then twin fireflies, then nothing at all. I was alone again. I crouched down on the road. By now the rain had slowed to a gentle mist. All around me, frog calls and the shrill chorus of cicadas blended into a hypnotic sort of white noise. The air was heavy and wet. It clung to my skin in a film of suffocating moisture. I needed a cigarette. As I reached for the pack, I remembered the mechanic's words. "It lures them." I looked into the trees. I couldn't see that scrap of red fabric anymore. Still, I knew it was watching, whatever it was. The man in red could have been a hallucination brought on by my sleepless, heat-addled brain. My psyche does tend to betray me in times of stress. That's part why I set out on this trip to begin with, wasn't it? When I'm on the road, I'm nodding my head. There's only here and now, gas stations and billboards and exit markers, and the question of where to go next. I think maybe it's what I live for. Being anywhere else. I climbed onto the hood of my car and sat there, legs stretched out. I felt safer up there. Of every detail I've recorded so far, what follows is the part that I'm perhaps the least proud of. I lit another cigarette. The rest of the night is like a hazy dream. It took till around midnight for a tow truck to arrive. I don't remember if it was the one I called for all those hours ago or the one sent by the mechanic. It had no company logo. I watched the driver haul my car onto the bed, red mud caked across the pearly blue hood. I watched him hand me paperwork. I watched myself sign. I watched myself get into the passenger seat of the truck. I watched us drive away. I'm sitting on a cot in some 2-star motel room as I write this account. I think I'll take a break from road tripping for a while. Not that I have much of a choice. The car is far beyond repair, I was told. I'll work odd jobs in this town, save a little, and then hitchhike my way back home when I'm ready. I'll even give Kay a call. But first, I need to catch my breath. As I type, I can't help but feel like I never left that place. I'm still on that backcountry road between sand and sky and endless pines. I watch in the tree line as a car overturns itself in a ditch, curls of smoke rising from a hood. I watch as the driver gets out and makes a call. I watch as they wait and wait and wait. When the time is right, I'll approach. I've been here so long. I'm hurt, and yet no one ever offers to help. My clothing is torn. My body is mangled. I need a cigarette.